Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. Well, we now have the official shortlisting for C3000, the General Purpose Frigate project, and no surprise, it's the Mogami from Japan and the MEKO 200 from Germany. That was leaked a couple of weeks ago. It's now been confirmed. There are a couple of unusual aspects. The Japanese bid will consist of a single design, and I'll come back to that because, in fact, it's not nearly as simple as that. But the German offer consists of two designs. I believe that the first one is something called the MEKO 200, which is being delivered for Egypt, and the second one is an Australianized version of the ship with the Saab 9LV combat management system and maybe a few others. Now, the bidders were given the choice, apparently, in the secret tendering process of offering options. The Germans chose to do so. The Japanese did not. Now, the offer coming from Japan looks like it is the Mogami frigate currently under construction, which would be consistent with this in-service requirement, but that is not the thing known as the Mogami FFM, if you like, an upgraded Mogami that Japan would like to bid. Now, the first of these isn't delivered until 2027, so if Japan offers that, it would seem to put it in breach of the government's own procurement rules. Now, you can get a hint about what's going on here because in the media kits that came with the government's release, the Mogami is listed as 133 metres in length. That's the one currently being built, while the one Japan would like to offer is significantly longer at 145 metres. To make this situation even more confusing, the first 6 of the Mogamis have no vertical launch missile cells compared to the 32 that will eventually be on the upgraded FFM version going on. So one has to ask, what is the situation? Are the rules that the ship has to be in service or not? During Senate estimates on November 6th, a bit more light was shed on this totally secretive process, but really not very much. Defence officials said that each bidder had to submit the exemplar design referenced in response to the Surface Fleet Review, even though, as we've explained many times, that review couldn't get 3 out of 4, or as it turned out, 3 out of 5 of those designs right. All of the people employed in that review should hand their money back. They did such a poor quality job. So what happens now? Even that's unclear. As I say, Japan hopes to offer the FFM. In fact, I'll go further and say, it's my understanding that Japan has no intention of offering anything but the FFM, although the way around it, and again, this is layer of confusion upon layer of confusion. There's another theory that it's only for the first 3 ships built in a parent shipyard that will have to be delivered with its current configuration for another navy. But the balance of the order, the remaining 7 ships being built in Australia, Tranche 2, so to speak, will have some sort of local configuration. So it could be that the first 3 ships from Japan will be the Mogami under construction right now, the shorter version with no or a few VLS cells and a Japanese combat management system, while the balance of them will be Australianized, but the Australian ships won't even begin construction until, the early 2030s at the least. Now, the pathway for Thyssenkrupp Marine Systems looks simpler and considerably less risky because presumably they will now be permitted to focus on the Australianized version of the MEKO with the Saab combat management system because that bid has already been accepted as being valid. The company is familiar with Australian rules and marine regulations, having designed the original Anzac frigates. A lot of that information needs to be updated, but fundamentally it's there. And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, MECO ships, typically frigates and corvettes, are in service with about a dozen navies. So tweaking them for local regulations and laws is something that the company is used to doing, and also including local equipment. Now, unless defence and government completely change direction during the coming phase, which will be an offer definition activity or something like that, the Japanese Mogami presumably comes with something called an OYQ-1 combat management system. I can't find much detail about it. I believe it also is supplied by Mitsubishi. I'm sure it's an attractive product, but I doubt whether it would be interconnectable with the Australian surface fleet, which is standardised around 9LV. Now, it has a few other attractive features, low crew numbers. It has a 5-inch gun as standard, same as the RAN. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force also operates Seahawk helicopters, so hangering and support arrangements should be the same. The propulsion features a Rolls-Royce MT-30 gas turbine, plus a couple of MAN diesels, which is similar to the Hunter-class frigate, which also use the Rolls-Royce gas turbine engine. I'll say, as an aside, if either Korean design had been selected, they would have come with a more advanced and quieter hybrid diesel-electric system. But this is the world we live in. So back to Mogami, it has an integrated radar mast, which is the way of the future. As I say, the 6 later frigates in what we will call Batch 1, they have a 16-cell VLS. But again, to be very clear, when enthusiasts for the Mogami speak enthusiastically about 32 VLS cells, that's for the future FFM model, not the one under construction, and it presumably won't be a reality for Australia until the project has morphed to a local build in the early 2030s. And if this sounds like a huge mess to you, it's a huge mess to me, and I can tell you very privately, the bidders are just as confused as everyone else. And what on earth does Defence and Navy hope to gain by all of this secrecy and all of this uncertainty? It's making a bad situation a whole lot worse. Regarding the actual likelihood of the first 3 Mogamis having a Japanese combat system, yeah, I initially thought that this was such a ridiculous idea it would never get up. But Defence Industry Minister Conroy appears to be throwing Chief of Navy Mark Hammond under a bus by saying he has been advised by CN that Navy can live with the situation. And to me, this would be an extraordinary situation with 3 ships, with an orphan combat system, with unknown connectivity to the rest of the surface fleet being introduced into service just because Navy wants something fast. In other words, the service which has been responsible for multiple procurement disasters, including the cancelled attack-class submarines, the totally botched C-1100 OPV project, and the very dubious selection process for the Hunter-class frigates, is being allowed, without question, as far as I can see, apart from the media, to potentially continue to destroy its own force structure. Now, that might not be the case if the MECO is selected, but since important people are saying, basically, we couldn't care less about what combat system it is, just give us something that floats, anything seems possible. Now, where to from here? No real idea. It remains in secrecy, by the way, which Pat Conroy has sought to brush off as saying it's all to do with commercial in-confidence requirements. Let me say, no, it's bloody well not. Commercial in-confidence includes narrow matters such as pricing and exact details of Australian industry content. It is not and has never been about a total blanket ban on all aspects of a bid. Now, a few words about West Australia and the fact that the Henderson Marine Precinct has been preordained as the location for the construction of the Australian version of the ships. And again, a reminder, this is the first time since 1976 that Australia will be buying warships built overseas. Government says they'll be built at the upgraded Henderson Precinct, and doing that is creating 10,000 new jobs. I very much doubt that number. I very much doubt it's anywhere near that because, of course, Defence won't release any of their costings or any of their underlying assumptions. Now, the company Austal is at the centre of this, and they've just very recently been announced as the builder of 8 heavy tank landing craft. This is to go on top of the earlier order, for which a contract has not yet been signed, for the delivery of medium landing craft to the Army. Anyway, these heavy tank landing craft are almost 4,000 tonnes in size. We're getting 8 of them. Damen has been selected as the designer. Damen are a very good company, Dutch designer, know them well, been around for hundreds of years. But an Australian company, a Port Macquarie-based Burden, are in the process of constructing a very similar prototype landing ship tank for the US Army. They're also doing prototype medium landing ships for the US Army. And one has to ask, why were they not also selected as the Australian designer builder for the LSTs rather than Damen? It seems complete madness to be selecting another new designer when a perfectly acceptable Australian alternative is sitting there. In fact, when you're building a landing ship tank for the US Army, I would have thought that's a pretty good part of your portfolio to be able to point to. Now, the apparent logic for Damen and their LST, because I know that they've built one for Nigeria and they might have other customers, is because it's in service, quotation marks in service. Okay, but as I've just said, if that doctrine is going to be implemented rigidly, it's going to lead to the disaster of C-3000 because the in-service Mogami has the Japanese combat system and the in-service Miko 200 has the Egyptian combat system. But since we're talking about Australian industry, complete idiocy when it comes to industry policy, I had the chance with a couple of my colleagues of visiting Sydney-based DroneShield. I'll have more to say about them in the future. I'm just a bit time-limited today. And DroneShield, it's a very impressive and, might I say, very Australian company that has been developing anti-drone solutions to combat Class 1 and Class 2 UAS. These are the ones at the lower end of the range, of a few kilos, quadcopters and things like that, that are being used with such devastating effect by Ukraine in the fight back against Russia. These small FPV drones are having a huge impact on the battlefield, and they are undoubtedly going to play a major role in all future conflicts. And not just in the air, by the way, but they'll also be for naval applications. We're again seeing that in Ukraine, and there'll be ground-based uninhabited systems as well. Now, DroneShield has had a lot of export success, selling mainly to the United States, but to additional NATO members, including the UK and France. They are also a supplier of systems to Ukraine, because the Russians are using these things. DroneShield is helping effectively combat that. Now, what do you think the level of interest from the ADF has been, the Army in particular? Would anyone like to have a guess? Do you need a few seconds to think about that? Is the ADF interested in acquiring an anti-drone, desperately needed capability produced by an Australian company in Australia that has an impressive record of export success? The answer, obviously, is no. No, not a single sale to the ADF, not one. Now, I'll add to that by pointing out that DroneShield has a scalable suite of products, and they can also offer perimeter security systems to prevent against attack from these smaller drones, typically protecting, say, an airfield. You've got a lot of vulnerable aircraft parked out in the open, because they can supply not only the jamming technology that you use to knock these things out of the air, you block the signal going to the drone, but you can also block GPS signals, and you can add on sensors such as radar and electro-optics. Now, when I was looking at all of this, I thought, okay, yeah, that sort of package, that actually sounds familiar. And so I had a quick look. And guess what? A couple of months ago, the RAAF awarded US high-tech startup company Anduril a $30 million 3-year service contract to provide perimeter security systems for Darwin. Now, again, I just have to ask, and the exasperation must really be showing, and that is, who is making these ridiculous decisions and who is signing off on them? High-tech Australian company growing rapidly, completely ignored. US big tech company owned by tech billionaires awarded the contract. And these sorts of things, I mean, obviously don't have an overview of every single contract being signed, but anecdotally they seem to be multiplying. And I can tell you, defence leadership, if what they say in in Senate estimates is anything to go by, they're completely unconcerned, believing that they are spending such huge amounts of money on the portfolio that companies, both Australian and local, will always be salivating for business. Now, personally, I'm not so sure about that, and I think we've been sowing the seeds of Australian industry doom for some time. And I'll have a final quick word about another project, the cancellation of JP9102, the sovereign satellite capability that I've talked about previously. And on that one, we're told it's not cancelled, it's being rescoped. And basically, when the company was selected last year, a few of us had been questioning why Defence was going for a very expensive, exquisite solution based on large geostationary satellites rather than looking at alternatives. And we were basically told, well, we're a bunch of idiots, that the RAAF and the satellite experts in defence have studied this and the only possible solution was stuff in geostationary orbit. What a surprise to now be told that geostationary is no longer appropriate and instead we need to look at a multi-orbit solution. Now, another small detail is that it turns out that Lockheed Martin Australia hasn't been paid a cent. Lockheed Martin might be a big company, but Lockheed Martin Australia is not, and the whole thing is wrong in principle. And the other part of it that is even more objectionable is that they have about 12 local subcontractors, likewise, who have not been paid a cent. Same thing, not just be completely out of pocket. I'll quickly wrap up with a personal hobby horse of mine, media attention, the misreporting or non-reporting of security issues. It's not the fault of individual journalists. I know many of them well. They are at an individual level doing outstanding work, but it's the editors they are responsible to and the structure of the industry. There were 3 important addresses at the National Press Club, one by outgoing US Ambassador Caroline Kennedy that I couldn't attend, and the other 2 were from Jeff Raby, Australia's former ambassador in Beijing, who gave a fascinating address about China and particularly the dynamic with Russia, and that was followed by one of the great journalists of the modern era, Nick Bryant, former BBC correspondent in Washington, who's now moved to Australia. He has an amazing network of contacts. He's an AUKUS skeptic. His view is that if anyone thought the US would prioritise Australia's needs, they were dreaming. I noticed a couple of uniformed forelock tuggers in the audience for Caroline Kennedy yucking it up. As far as I could tell, there was no official interest in either Jeff Raby or Nick Bryant. Those presentations were far more productive, far more information-rich, and unfortunately, the same pattern was true for the media. There was a lot of focus on Kennedy and very, very little interest in Raby and Bryant. It's just another example of focusing on style and profile rather than on content and substance. Goodbye for now. Thank you for listening and see you next time.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.